So I want to get into a little bit of and I thought this was also a brilliant aspect of your work, how this economic machine is really an organism in and of itself, right? Like I had Fabio Vighi on the podcast, and he made a very compelling case that, so BlackRock came and they wrote a report in 2019, and they sent the report off to the government. They're now working with the government. Trump kind of brought them in, and as advisors, they're like the world's largest private financial institution, right? For people who don't know, and if people listen to my podcast with Fabio, it's just going to be a quick summary. But fundamentally, they said, we're in a really shitty situation economically, and there's only one solution, and that means we have to give, and this is all public information. They sent this letter and published it. They said, we have to go direct and give consumers access to enormous amounts of capital. We just basically have to hand people a bunch of money. Then we have to restrict the flow of that money to prevent hyperinflation through the middle class. And this is kind of the scenario we're in. Otherwise, we're fucked. Like all of these different economic, financial, house of cards would start to crumble. Well, miraculously, and look, I'm not one to delve into any conspiracies or whatever, but miraculously, the conditions for exactly that came about in 2020, in which we handed out trillions to individual consumers, and then the middle class, because of lockdowns, was actually frozen out, so money didn't circulate in the same way, and it was absorbed by the super corporations, the mega corporations, which were still functioning, like the Amazons of the world. All of these multi-billion-dollar corporations all absorbed the capital like giant battery systems that could absorb it, preventing that inflation from hitting until now, where now everything's back open and the money's circulating, and then now we're starting to feel the inflation. But it's making a case, and I think you make a similar case, totally different vector, but a similar case that perhaps also what we're blind to is who's really running the show. And what's really running the show is our financial economic system itself. Forget about there's a bad group of people and these, maybe not, maybe it's just an economic system like an organism. And like every organism, its priority is to survive and grow. That's what every organism wants to do. What do you want to do? Survive, expand, reproduce, grow. And maybe that's actually what's really driving everything else. And we're pointing at this thing and that thing, but it's actually the organism of our economic system itself that's driving so much of our action, from our wars to our politics to everything that we think is something else. We're just blind to who's really running the show.
You're absolutely right. We have outsourced our decisions and planning to the financial system. This wasn't always the case. 100 years ago, there were rules on corporations and such, but now each corporation has become its own miniature superorganism where they have to pursue profits. And if you have some ecologically aware CEO that wants to measure things differently, he or she will get booted out by the shareholders, by someone who will maximize profits. And those profits are completely tethered to fossil energy and expansion of natural resource consumption. So in many ways, what's happening is nobody's fault, but we're all complicit. And there's this built-in drive for economic growth. And personally, I think we're approaching an inflection point where we have to choose growth or life on the planet, and the ecological consequences of what is happening. I don't know if you've had episodes with people talking about it, but I'll just briefly give you a 1-minute summary and then come back to your question because I feel strongly about it. Since I've been on this planet, we've lost 70% of the populations of animals, insects, and birds and fish.
That's sad. Like if you let yourself feel it,
it's horribly sad, dude.
It's really sad.
It motivates my work because on the downside of what's coming, these other species have no voice.
Yeah.
We don't have dolphins or giraffes or bumblebees on corporate boards. And so how do we plan and respond to what's coming while including the natural world in our decisions is something that I think about all the time. Mm-hmm. And I think to just use less, I mean, I'm an environmentalist, but I think a lot of the environmental stories out there are energy and systems blind, because we can't just let's leave all the fossil fuels in the ground and continue our economic system is a really naive assertion. So how are we going to protect the well-being of the humans alive today, the humans alive in the future, and the other nieces, nephews, cousins in nature that we share this blue-green planet with is a central question here.
You know, I want to bring this up because I'm rewatching Game of Thrones with my wife, who had never seen it, and she's obviously super hooked. It's just a truly amazing show, actually, going back and watching it. And it was one of the shows that I got really into when it was going, and I read all the books because I couldn't wait after I saw the first season. I was really into it. And there's a storyline of the Iron Bank of Bravos, which is lending money to everybody. And you can see that they have a small hand that they're playing in a lot of the different turmoil and the conflict between the states and how they really have a power source. And of course, they have their own army. But I think they maybe missed an opportunity to tell a cultural story in Game of Thrones in which actually it could have played as it really is in life. The Iron Bank, the entire interconnected web of Federal Reserve, is really driving things. And yes, there's individual corporations. There's our Lannisters and there's our the Dorne and all of the other houses. And if you haven't seen Game of Thrones, apologize. But nonetheless, like there's a centralized banking system, a financial system that's interlinked with all of these individual corporate agents. But it's the bank itself, it's the system itself, which probably even before corporations reached this place and monopolies have started to form. But really, the economic engine itself, from this meta perspective, has probably been driving things for a fucking long time. Like, follow the money and you'll understand world history.
So I have watched Game of Thrones and I have read the books, and winter is coming, Aubrey. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Is finance is driving and steering our cultural car. But the car is made out of materials and powered by energy. But finance, we have created monetary markers to represent our status and success. And when money, I'll just briefly say this in 1 minute, money in our economic textbooks is the way that money is created is wrong. Economic textbooks treat that banks lend existing capital to people that are creditworthy. And the reality is that banks create money when a loan is made. So when you get a loan for your business, they put $1 million into your bank. And at the same time, there's an IOU on the bank balance sheet. You have $1 million cash. You owe the bank $1 million. The financial system is stable. But when that $1 million comes into your bank at that moment, the same amount of copper and oil and trees and dolphins are on the earth. And so what we're doing is our financial system has a compulsion to grow, because when you get that loan, they didn't create the interest on the loan. So we have to grow in order to pay back prior financial commitments. And you're right, there is this embedded financial overlord and this is what I call the super-organism. I know a lot of billionaires and politicians, both U.S. and internationally. They're not in control of this. We really have outsourced our decision-making to the market and the financial system, which has taken on a momentum and a life of its own. And there is no easy answer. I mean, the Federal Reserve is meeting later this week, Jackson Hole, a big meeting. People are talking about it. So they can do two things. They can raise interest rates, which crushes demand, costs more money for people to get a mortgage, reduces consumption, reduces inflation, but it's going to cause a recession or worse. Or they could give money away, like you said, in 2020 and 2009. Central banks of the world did the perfect thing to turn the economy around but not for the environment, not for our low entropy, high quality remaining resources, not for the natural world, not for future generations. So we are a can-kicking species. And I would argue, well, going way back, Thomas Malthus said that our exponential demand for food would outstrip our linear demand to create it. He was wrong because he didn't know about fossil fuels that we would soon develop. Paul Ehrlich wrote a book in the 1960s called The Population Bomb, predicting some of these things would happen. He was wrong because we developed globalization, where we outsourced to the areas of cheaper production, and we went to debt in a large way, where debt is like, so money, Aubrey, is a claim on energy. The money you have in your wallet, the money you have in your bank account, and anyone listening to this, when they spend that money, it will be on something that requires energy. Mm-hmm. So debt is a claim on future energy. And so if we can't afford the things that we have today, we can go into more and more debt. And what we do then is we consume things today that we would have been able to consume 20 years ago. But when we get to that 20 years point, those resources will either be not available or much more costly. So then in 2009, we had this financial crisis, and the global central banks took over the role of commercial banks and have kind of been managing the system since then. And the United States is by far not in the worst shape. Japan and Europe have this problem where they have to bail out people. Like in the UK and Germany right now, they're putting a cap on how much families can pay for energy because their energy prices are going through the roof, like 5 to 10 times higher than they are in America. If the government says you only pay $10,000 a year on energy, we're going to pay the rest. Eventually, the government, where does the government get money? So we're in this snowballing situation of lots of demands on energy and money, and the governments are coming in to help us manage that. And if you think about human behavior, I don't think we will radically change to the level needed before there's a crisis. And so my work is trying to inform leaders and politicians on the one hand to have a plan when these things happen, but also citizens and people to raise their consciousness, develop social networks, friends, relationships, community, kind of looking around your house and all the things that we use energy for, and maybe having a conversation with yourself and your loved ones, do we need all this stuff? And the more of those people that we have as examples, as pilots, I think the better the future choices will be. But getting back to your question, yes, I think finance is steering our entire thing right now. And we like to, as humans, we kind of like to blame outgroups for our problems, like it's the billionaires' fault. Well, billionaires have been successful given the rules of the game right now, but they're not driving this. They're responding to the cultural signals that we give.